Hey guys, this is Storm Productions, aka number 473. I still have troubles using normal human speech. It's hard for me. Yeah. We're gonna try to convince Commander Bruce to follow my plan. So we should let the enemy bring the battle to us. They are free, and capital is our place of strength. By moving back beyond our walls, we challenge their honor. How can they refuse such a challenge? Bruce looked at me as if I'd grown another head. The sergeant and I exchanged nervous glances. Brilliant plan, Alex. That's why I keep you and your brother around. Let's see those cowards fight us on our own home turf, eh? We did it. With the order given, things moved quickly. Commander Bruce found a reindeer for me, and the two of us rode over the battlefield in the darkness, shouting for a retreat behind the city walls. The snowstorm had subsided, and the light of pre-dawn made the silhouettes of men visible. Our soldiers withdrew into the city, and the gates were closed. The few enemy stragglers who were caught on the way back were cut down. I watched the retreating Solgarian army move away from the keep. There were just a few hundred longbowmen and knights. How had such a small force managed to slaughter so many of our men? They were apparently very strong, and they are a traitor in our ranks. Whew. And we need a new commander. Our leadership was incompetent. Without Baron to guide him, Commander Bruce had ordered us to fight blindly. If we had stayed behind our walls in the beginning, if we hadn't left our city gates open, if we hadn't marched out to meet them in the darkness. Later that morning, the sun rose with indifference over the field of red snow, and it was too late for regrets. Chapter 2. It was a bleak morning, bitter, cold, and sad. The snow... wait, Excuse me. Someone came to visit me. The snow still clung to the ground, some of it still bloodied from the battle, and I couldn't tell if the chatter of my teeth were due to cold or fear. The battle was over, and yet I could still feel it. Trudging feet crunched the snow as we stepped back into the camp. There was a crowd gathered there, and once we were close enough I could see why. Proudly sitting atop on the snow-white reindeer was the king. You men who gather with us know that your lives have been spared with purpose. He wasn't yelling, but his voice was strong enough to carry across the crowd with little effort. Many of you has experienced death for the first time, and that is an unfortunate truth of this world you will no longer be able to ignore. It saddens me that your world must change so completely so quickly. Just know that what you have witnessed today, the slaughter of your brothers at arms, will not go unnoticed or unavenged. Also know that I will have to tell you. What I have to tell you will prove a grave shock to some of you, but not most. The men who came here so cowardly in the dead of night may have been some of your brothers, your fathers, your family, your lovers. It would seem that the good Queen Charlotte has decided that it is necessary to pit you against those you had wished to go home to. In this single sad act, she has branded you traitors to your people, forced you to kill your own. She has taken it upon herself to punish me for my father's actions. His tyranny against her people all those decades ago was unjust and something I have never supported. His death that occurred soon after the freedom of her men was simply not soon enough. But she cannot seem to let go of this past. She sees in me what she fought in him, and for that she cannot be blamed. But her actions cannot be ignored. If they are ever to be forgiven, they must be matched. Retribution must be taken. Our Lady of Ice would allow nothing less of her loyal followers. It pains me deeply to say it. In 3 days' time we will be marching towards her capital. I hope that when we arrive it will be possible to make peace once more, to unite before Excuse me. Oh God, what did I do? To unite before those across the sea decide to pour salt on our wounds and crush our toes into the ground with their greedy golden heels. I understand what this means for most of you, but I pray that you will find the wisdom of Althea in what I'm asking you. To show your queen that you have not betrayed her, you must fight to expose her error. I'm asking the same of their affiants whose side you battled by. Remember that for most of them, I am not their king. While I am by right and by honor, they have to place their trust in a man who's once been sire to their enemy. They fought to save you from my father's tyranny, and it was his wisdom that guided them. When the assassins of my father took his family, I put on his crown as a sign of good faith. I took his men and fought my own. I understand how it feels to have family treat you like a coward, a betrayer. But also know that they can be shown they are wrong. And if you will trust me, trust the man who once fought for you, for little reason other than it was right and just, I will give you a home to return to. There will be a ceremony for those who were lost under the lights of Althea's grace. The pyres will be constructed by the clerics, and those who feel they can, and those who feel they can, and the ashes of your brothers will grace the wind by morning. I wish that I could give you this day to grieve, but I fear I cannot. Those who are not constructing the pyres shall be assisting in packing the camp for move. May the Lady of Ice bless your hands with skill and your minds with wisdom in these dark times. The fuck are we supposed to think about this? Oh god, this is no good. We're traitors. Great. Well, we don't really have anything to return to. Our dad's dead and stuff, but damn. Is it okay if I just don't pick sides and just, like, go somewhere completely different? The camp was silent as the king and the men accompanying him rode away. I think everyone was processing what just had been said. I wondered if, maybe, the words hadn't really been his. That perhaps someone had given them to him in advance. Because they weren't the words of a mad king. And Mad King Kendrick was mad. Everyone knew that. Slowly, a hum began to build in the crowd. The king's orders had been clear. The clerics were going to build a pyre, the men who were going to aid, the rest were going to pack. In that moment, our anger, confusion, and sadness, it was like all we could do was... In our anger, it was like all we could do, really do was obey. I went to my brother, which meant I was helping build the pyre. I didn't find any comfort in him. But even in the silence, that was okay, because we were both alive. Right now, that had to be enough. I'd never been to a real funeral before. The pyre had taken all day to build, but we got it, done just in time for the moon to rise. Althea's lights shined brightly on the pale bodies of men in their finest laying in the line along the road. There were 3 pyres built, which I didn't quite understand. The first 2 made sense. One was for fallen soldiers, and the other was for the fallen of our enemies that they could not come and claim. But the third, which was taller than the rest, only had Assistant Commander Baron. I thought to ask one of the clerics why he was given a separate passage from the other men, but I never gathered the nerve. I could only assume it was because of his rank, which felt wrong to me somehow. He should be allowed to travel with the men who fell with him. Why should he be forced to take the journey alone, simply because he had a title? I wanted to bring this up to my brother, who was standing by my side as the prelate set the passage rites to guide the soldiers on that journey. But speaking would mean interrupting the rites, and I didn't want to risk sending one of their souls the wrong way. This was so much different than what we had at home. The pyres were never this big for one. We never had this many bodies put on them. The family of the dead usually had time to prepare as well. They could make nice clothes for them to meet Althea in, and personal effects weren't difficult to come by. We never had a town cleric, so it was usually my father who lit the flames and gave the passage rites. When he died, it should have been Nick. Because he wasn't there, the rites were given to a neighbor, but I was the one to light the flame. I wondered if my brother was thinking about that now, not being able to give our father his passage rites. I couldn't see his face until the pyres were ablaze, but the expression he had was different from what I expected. The smoke which carried the men's souls rose to the sky, and the Archimagus conjured a wind to carry the ashes, allowing both body and soul a safe journey to Athia. The families of the men lilted into a graceful choir to comfort them for their journey, and the prelate's words grew thunderous so that they could still hear the steps they should take. The moment had me in awe, but my brother looked bored. How much death had he seen for this to not sadden him? Would he have been this way at our father's passage? I couldn't even imagine it. When the last of the ashes drifted away, the songs began to fade. The prelate said his final words, and soon it was time to move on. While the whole experience had me both sad and rattled, I couldn't keep a myriad of questions from bubbling into my head. Though I wanted them answered, I wasn't sure if my brother should be the one to do it. I spotted the prelate going to the medical tent. Many of the men went to the tavern, including my brother. I'll go where I can find Rubus, but for now I'll follow the prelate because you don't go and celebrate when so many people died. It was obvious my brother wanted to be left alone, and the prelate could probably answer my questions better than he could. Since most everyone had gone to the tavern, the tent was eerily empty. I knew that I'd seen prelate walk in here, but I wasn't spotting him now. Had he gone into the curtained areas? Maybe he was tending some of the wounded. Would it be rude of me just to walk in and check? I jumped when I heard the tent door close behind me. I spun around and spotted the Archimagus. Hello, Ide Cordero. He gave me a genial greeting. Do you need medical attention? I shook my head. You must be here for conversation. Yes, I find the prelate fascinating to speak with as well. I nodded. I see. You will likely find him in the back, dodging his prayers. The Archimagus chuckled at his comment, but I was confused by it. I followed him further into the tent, and the prelate was indeed in one of the curtained areas. You brought company. The prelate had an absolute blank look on his face. He must be very tired. He wanted to speak with you about something. I see. A warm smile graced his face, and he gestured to sit on the bed. So I did. What was it you wished to ask me? The questions flooded into my mind, but only one managed to escape my lips, and it took its time doing so. Why was the assistant commander not with the other soldiers? I see. Because you're so gaudy and you don't understand our customs. The prelate closed his eyes, lowered his head, and shook it. The assistant commander may not look like it, but he was of noble class. His family, you see, purchased him for a different route to Althia's arms. It would only be confusing for him if he were to travel with other soldiers. I wasn't aware you could buy alternate routes to the afterlife. The confusion on my face must have been evident because the prelate continued to explain. The belief behind it begins in Montecrest, but soon took a hold of most of the nobles in Athria. You see, it's understood that there's a period of wait between death and acceptance into Althia's gardens. During the time it takes to travel on the Bridge of Light, Althia has time to judge you and place you accordingly in her home, or decide to not place you at all, even possibly force you to walk the Bridge of Light until she feels you're fit to move on. In Montecrest, a culture of allowances arose. You could donate a particular amount of gold to the prelate of your temple, and he would read special instructions that would allow you to bypass the Bridge of Light. You can see how that could be popular among the noble caste here. I nodded. The whole thing's a twaddle. It's a widely held belief, Lucius. That was the mix between Lucius and Rubus. I can't. Rubius. Excuse me. Oh God, I'm really sitting uncomfortably right now. Oh, come on. Why would clerics have a special set of instructions just to give the wealthy dead? Althea has little interest in monetary things. She judges on actions, not how you carry in what one can carry in their purses. Belief and logic rarely go hand in hand. We really shouldn't be perpetuating lies of the caliber. I only repeat what I have been told. And you do as you're told without question. The Archmagus was getting really annoyed by the whole conversation, yet the prelate seemed strangely calm. Why don't you tell Ike Cordell how you really feel about this kettle of tripe? How I feel has little bearing in what is believed, Rubus. Well, it could if you were willing to talk about it. Now I was getting confused again. Did the prelate not believe his own little teachings? Why was he prelate then? I suppose I could have asked him, but I couldn't get up the nerve. Does that answer your question, Ike Cordell? I nodded. I'm glad. It pains me to see you acting so simple, Lucius. I'm going back to the tent. The Archmagus left without much warning. Do not mind him. He's just a man that is passionate in his beliefs, even when they differ greatly from the norm. There's something to be respected in that. There sort of was. I nodded at the prelate. Then he began to stare at me. I guess he was waiting for me to say something. I opened my mouth, but of course no sound came out. I was getting uncomfortable, so I eventually excused myself and left. A blast of cold wind hit me as soon as I left the tent. No one was outside anymore, and my rapidly numbing limbs told me why. Most of the men probably took refuge in the tavern, but then, with the sort of day it's been, just as many were probably already sleeping in the tent. I was pretty tired myself, but the tavern was bound to be warmer than the tents would be at any rate. It wouldn't hurt to get some good sleep before packing tomorrow, but there was no telling when I'd have it chill weather. Oh, come on, I didn't want to go. In the midst of the good cheer of this place, I could hear the prince's voice ring out. I didn't have to. As soon as the man had me in his chambers, he ripped the belt from his body and threw it to the ground. After that, it was only a matter of maneuvering to snatch it up and return it to his father. His captive audience erupted with bawdy laughter. The prince had his way about him that made everyone turn to look when he wanted their attention, but then I guess that just came with being royalty. At home, I would sit in my room some nights, slowly peeling the disguise off my chest and wonder what it would be like to be as open and carefree as it seemed to be. When the prince saw me, he swiftly waved me over. Ike Cordell! The prince clapped his hands together in joy when I arrived. You managed to survive the storm of blood and snow. Come, sit with me. The prince shooed away one of his guards so I could sit next to him. I uncomfortably did so. Such awful business, this whole war thing, isn't it? Even though he was frowning, he didn't all look that upset. Father seems very intent on dragging me along for this one. He gave a forlorn sigh. I suppose it's nice that he wants to spend time with me. I just don't have the stomach for war. I wondered why the prince kept giving the word war such sarcastic undertones. But you have already survived your first. The only other aide to manage that was the other Cordell. The prince smiled and grabbed me by my shoulder. I'm sure that if I need anything, you will come rushing to my side, just like you used to. I'd vaguely heard about my brother being an aide, but I didn't know he did things for the prince too. I nodded. Oh, splendid, you're just such a lovely person. The prince pulled me in for a quick hug. Then you won't mind if I ask you to deliver some invitations for me tomorrow. I opened my mouth, but only managed to convey confusion. For my masquerade ball, a beautiful last hurrah for these men marching to their fate. The prince was beaming as he spoke. I wish to invite everyone and wrote up some wonderful invitations for each man to have as a keepsake for what's going to be a fantastic evening. He had a servant make invitations for every soldier. The poor person. And he wanted me to hand and deliver them on top of that. I need to be helping the men to do the bulk of packing tomorrow. There's no way I have time for both. But this was the prince. I couldn't really say no. I nodded at the man and I swore I heard a groan from the men around us. Perfect, then you must come see me first thing in the morning. I nodded again. It seemed what When he was done making requests for me, he was ready to go back to telling his story. He pretty much ignored me for the rest of the night, even though I continued to sit next to him and listen to his tales. You dick! Now you deserve the mouse. Not even a rat, just a mouse. Man, no one in this place kind? I like Rubus. He's cool. Yeah, fuck that guy. Eventually, I had to drag myself from the tavern to go to the sleeping tent. I wasn't looking forward to morning, but then I suspected I wouldn't be for quite a long time. I probably shouldn't have agreed to this. The dirty looks I was getting from... Okay, I made my way towards the castle. But then it wasn't like I had much choice. What was I gonna do? Tell the prince no? Yes. Just go. He's so friendly. And then he'll make another person do his dirty chores. When I reached the gates, I showed the gold medal I'd been given, and that would allow me through. The guard looked overcautious. I knew I'd hear. I nodded, and the guard scrutinized the medal some more. Seems like there's a new one of you coming in every week. He handed me the medal back, and so I moved so I could pass through. Well, fancy medal or not, we don't want any trouble from you soldier types, right? I nodded again. I was about to pass the man when a question struck me. Why was there so much animosity towards the king's own soldiers? Would the guard even tell me if I asked? Maybe I should just go to the castle. The prince was probably expecting me to be early. Move on. No, there was no time for that sort of thing right now. I could indulge questions when I didn't have the task ahead of me. I nodded to the guard one more time and quickly made my way past him. I made it to the castle with relative ease, but the layout of the place still baffled me. You wouldn't suspect it was made entirely out of hallways by looking at it from the outside. Maybe I could get the Archimagus to teach me a spell on how to divine your way through a maze. Always keep your hand on the right side. Though luck and brute force of will, I managed to find the prince. He was standing behind an elaborately decorated divider, and there were clothes scattered about the place. I spotted a stack of invites tied together with gold ribbon on a table, and I considered just grabbing them and leaving. Did you bring the corset? The prince had given me extra orders that I don't remember, or he thought I was someone else. It was probably a good idea to introduce myself. Of course, nothing came out of my mouth when I tried. Would that telltale silence mean the Eid has arrived? Because I know I heard someone come in. The prince popped part of his head out. Did I see that? It is you. I don't know why. It just looks so funny. Okay, woo. I assumed and went back for getting dressed. You're early. Early? If I'd known I'd have time, I would have taken it to ask that guard those questions. Or not, I've lost track of time. But regardless of that, it's good you've shown up now. I need the opinion of someone who doesn't get paid by my father to tell me how good I look. The prince laughed and stepped out from behind the screen. I was stunned, no, flabbergasted. Is it too much? The prince pouted his lips at me. Do the hoops make my behind large enough, you think? He spun around and tried to look at his own rear. Honestly, I'm worried that the boots are making me too tall, but the heels are what women are wearing this year. Everything he had on was what women were wearing. Well, go on, I know you're shy, but you can at least answer my questions. Why? For marching out masquerade, I thought it would be a ton of fun to have the men dress as women and the women as men. He laughed. I can't think of any more distractingly fun, can you? Men dressed as women. That meant I'd be in a dress. Could I do that? Would I look too much like a girl? Suddenly I couldn't seem to get enough air. Is something wrong? The prince moved to me as I grasped the edge of the table. I managed to calm myself until he put a hand on my shoulder. Could I risk the dress? But it wasn't just that. There was makeup and heeled boots. Do you need medical assistance? Are you having a heart attack? No. I shook my head and forced myself to calm down. It wasn't like my world was going to end if I looked too much like a girl, right? Are you afraid you won't look as good as me in a dress? You have very slight features, I'm sure, with the right makeup and... No! I spun around, which knocked the prince's hand back. I was really overreacting here. Why was this panicking me so much? Oh, I see. The prince gave me the warmest smile. You're afraid of being a little girly. All I could do was nod. I suppose you spend a lot of time being teased about that sort of thing, I nodded again, though it wasn't entirely the truth. It seemed a good idea to run with this assumption. I understand. I wasn't always the visitive man as I am now either. His laugh was bitter this time. Was he making fun of himself? Because there was no way he could think of himself as man he was then. Of course, I never got teased directly. I was my father's son after all. He sighed, hiked up his dress some, and sat down in his bed. But it's almost worse getting it behind your back. My father was no help either. I was supposed to be tough and strong like him. I tried for a long time to make myself into the man he wanted. But alas, swords and world wars were never something I could take to. Eventually, both father and I gave up. I was getting the feeling he wasn't trying to comfort me anymore. His life was bitter again. You know, if I'd been born a princess, things would have been much easier. At least my father would be proud of me. Princesses just need to be smart and graceful. I could at least do one of those things well. His sad smile shifted when he looked at me again. Oh, I'm rambling, aren't I? He got up and swished over me with with the grand, sweeping grin I'd come to expect from him. I know what we'll do. I'll call in my personal tailor and get a dress made for you. Crap, there was no way a tailor wouldn't notice my developing womanhood. Sit. I quickly snatched up the invite. Shouldn't I be delivering these? I helped him up. Oh yes, that's right. There won't be a party to go if you don't start getting those out. But when you finish, come right back here and we'll get you a glorious dress made. I nodded and took the opportunity to rush off. I could finish panicking once I was outside the castle gates. Props to the creators for making this lovely little plot twist. No, it's not even a plot twist, but a little plot point. Because I absolutely love it when I kind of love the stories where a girl has to dress up as a boy and keep it a secret, because like I am myself a bit tomboyish, and I guess it appeals to me. I think it's so fun. This is a great idea, like a good way to take advantage of that. The one with the ball and dressing up as women. I just thought and that didn't occur to me when I saw him in a dress. I was like, well, it's okay, you do you, but it was taking most of the day to get all the invitations out, but every soldier seemed happy to get them. Most of them even took excuse to take a break and ask me questions about the marching out masquerade. Thankfully, all the questions were easily answerable by reading the invitations. Plus, all the men were getting used to how quiet I could be, so they didn't expect a lot of direct answers when I could just point at the information on the invitation. One of the men I handed him the invite seemed especially amused about something. So did you hear? I raised an eyebrow at him. Turns out we caught a few of those bastards. I continued to stare at him in confusion. Who? The guys who attacked us. The Guardians. They were captured. He nodded with a bit too much enthusiasm. Snagged them up before they could run. They'll be sorry they didn't run after the spy masters get to them. For some reason it hadn't occurred to me that we would have taken any prisoners. You tied one up! Though I shouldn't have been surprised. Yeah, I had found one of them myself. He was probably taken captive with the others. What he said about the spy master worried me, though. Where are they? He shrugged. They're wherever they're keeping them. I bet they'll be wishing they're someone else. I just nodded. I didn't know what else to say or what reaction he expected of me. I excused myself so I could continue doing my job. James spotted me before I spotted him. Alex! He waved at me enthusiastically. I have finally learned that word. I'm so proud of myself. And rushed over to me. The pen chained to his clipboard swung wildly as he moved. Hey, how are the invites going? I offered him a small smile and showed him the dense stack in my hand. There were deceptively more in the stack than it appeared, seeing as the invitation was nearly on this nearly razor-thin parchment. It was strange stuff with a silky texture, and it was probably worth more gold than the gold-infused ink that was used to write on it. James commented on this when I handed it to him, just like everyone else had. Wow, this sure looks fancy. He flipped the invitation in hand a few times before tucking it into the clipboard. You're giving one of these to everybody? I nodded. Well then, Yep, okay, a break, yeah. Come on. James let loose a sharp whistle, and every soldier stopped in their tracks. Break time, boys! The sound of dropped pieces of equipment clanged through the campground. Garrett, run back to the building, and snag us some lunch, will ya? The man I presumed to be Garrett saluted James before dashing away. Sorry, moving a bit. He was small, little fellow, so he was probably sent because he could be fast. Probably got a minute to sit down, right? I bet your dogs are barking from delivering all day. He wasn't wrong, but I really didn't have the time. And the longer I took to deliver these invites, the less time I'd have to actually help the troops pack. I gave him a sheepish smile in a dismissive way. Oh, really? I was hoping we could use this as an excuse to get something to eat. Oh, what the hell. Just leave the invites with me. I'll say they got misplaced until we're done eating. I nodded, peeled the mechanic's invites from the stack and handed them over. You sure you don't want something to eat? I bet you're super hungry. I sort of was, but again, I didn't have the time to wait around for food. I shook my head. Okay then, I won't hold you up. He didn't sound entirely convinced, but gave me the chance to continue with my deliveries anyway. As I was rushing away, I heard James yell from behind me. See you at the party! I turned briefly to wave an acknowledgement, and he happily waved back. Oh yeah, they're gonna see us at the party, and it's gonna be good. They're gonna be like, holy shit, I think I'm gay. That's usually how it goes in these kind of stories. I moved a bit swiftly, not to get away from James, but to keep myself from getting more distracted by him. I had other deliveries to make. Oh, the Archimachus stood quietly in the same place as my previous visit, holding the same position over the same book. One would think he was some sort of dark statue that gave off such a grand illusion of life that you only thought it could speak and, The Archimachus let out a light chuckle, and it was eerily timed with the humor in my own thoughts. He couldn't read my mind, could he? I believe you have something for me, eyed Cordale. With haste I peeled his invitation from the stack and rushed over to hand it to him. He didn't look my way as he extended his hand to take it, and I set the invite into his open palm. In a quiver of rose-scented smoke, the invite disintegrated at the touch, which caused me to rear back and make a rather unmanly sounding noise. The Archimachus chuckled again. He didn't destroy it. I simply moved it out of the way for a moment. The Archimachus pointed at the table off his right, where I could see the invite sitting. He could have just told me to put it there rather than give me a heart attack. Telling you to set it there would have been utterly boring. Wait, could he really read my thoughts? Fetch me the almond flower. His hand was still outstretched, but as I glanced around the place, I spotted quite a lot of different flowers. It's the white one with the red salmon and 6 long pointed petals that feel like velvet. After he'd elaborated it, it was easy to spot a cluster of them on another table. I wondered what they were for as I brought them over for him. I was working on a more potent healing salve at Lucius Recrest. I just can't talk. I'm so sorry, creators. It's a really beautiful language. I just can't. I'm just fucking it up. These aren't precisely the flowers I need, but their stronger breath and lay deeper in the woods than I can travel alone. I half expected the flowers to crumble in a puff-scented smoke again, but instead he just set them next to his book. I hear your brother has good news waiting for him soon. You'll manage to work that lazy tongue of yours into a congratulations for him, won't you? I wasn't sure that what the Archimachus was even talking about. With Baron lulled into the arms of Althea, someone needs to continue doing his work. It's gonna be your brother? Cool. Your brother, despite his reluctance, is the chosen one. I apologize if I ruined the surprise. I just assumed you were bright enough to have worked it out on your own by now. Honestly, I hadn't really had the time to think about it. Unless, of course, you were already told. The connection between you and your blood is very frayed. Not like most siblings I've encountered. The Archmagus looked up from his text, but not to look at me. I still froze. Could he tell I was adopted? Would he tell anyone? But then, there are a lot of unusual things about your blood. I hope to discuss it with you more at the masquerade. I suspect that will shoot you free here. I nodded, but he turned his attention back to his book. Though I wasn't sure why I nodded. If I could get out of going, I probably should. Don't you have other deliveries to make? I nodded again and took the cue to leave. Interesting. He knows that we're not... I don't know if he knows we're a girl, but he knows something. We're different. He knows we're different. The medical tent was still incredibly busy, but then those injured soldiers wouldn't just be instantly better after the battle we'd had. It was going to be a rough forcing them to move with their injuries. The prelate was easy enough to spot in the crowd. His robes were fancier and his hair had a unique coloration to it. Yeah, it's blue. It was hard not to notice from the front because he kept it so long, but it actually shifted in a hue at the ends. Yes, blue! It was a lot like you've seen Alpheus in painted out of her. As I stared at the man, more similarities to a Lady of Ice began to strike me. In fact, he wore a flowing white dress to the masquerade. He'd probably be the spitting image of her. Well, her statues, anyway. The prelate's busy. I turned around to see my brother had already spotted and come over to me, delivering invites. I nodded and sifted on through the stack for his. You can just leave them with me. I'll get them to the guys that are in here. I shook my head and pulled his out. He had enough important things to do in here. I know you don't like to talk, but you have to get over that. Seems my brother was in a grumpy mood today. He always felt like he had to teach some sort of life lesson when he was grumpy. Not that he didn't have a point. This wasn't exactly the best place to have problems with shyness, but I wouldn't even be feeling this way with Nick if he wasn't coming off like a stranger. Nick looked at the invite I'd handed him and his face creased with worry. Are you going to this? I shrugged, but Nick wasn't looking away from the invite. I don't know. I don't want to. Good, this can only be trouble. It must have been nothing, noting the men in dresses part. Am I allowed not to go? Nick paused tensely before answering me. Probably not. Part of the job is going to be doing things for the prince, and he's sensitive. He sighed. Making him mad wouldn't be a great idea. Then what am I going to do? We'll think of something. You can leave those with me. I shook my head again. It's my job. You have enough to do. Not really. The prelate doesn't have the right supplies from the palace. Half of us can't even do anything until it gets sorted out. So I might as well help you with the rest of your delivery. I gave him half of the stack. We'll work out something when we get this done. I nodded and watched him walk out with the invites. I was going to follow when I heard my name being called out. Oh, Arcodale, excellent. I could use an escort to the palace. I would ask a soldier, but they're all busy. Surely the prelate could go to the palace himself, couldn't he? I kinda don't want to refuse him. But I'm not going on his path. I honestly didn't have the time. I shook my head and held up the invites. I see very well then, attend to your other duties. I nodded and left to do that. Nick was some help, though together we managed to get a dress from one of the serving women at the Wailing Mermaid that looked absolutely unflattering on me. She provided some makeup as well, and we really overpainted my face. I looked like and felt like a jester. I'd been worried about looking too much like a girl in a dress, but even before my figure was wrapped down and I was painted in a harlot, I didn't seem all that feminine. I held myself like a man. My hair was chopped short, my hands were worked rough, and not even my delicate facial features could fade away from the illusion that I wasn't actually a woman. While I was relieved there was a chance nobody would suspect I was something more than a boy in a dress, there was something depressing about it. It always helped the fantasy that if I did decide to out myself as a woman, I'd at least be an attractive one. Try to deepen your voice a little more if you talk tonight. I nodded. The wig had gotten me was itchy, and it felt strange to have her thick ridges of hair bouncing around my ears. You look good. You look splendid. He swung in front of me and took me by my arms. Hey, don't worry. No one is going to think you as a girl. We did a good job. He must have noticed my sadness and assumed it was because I was worried. Really? It was because he made me look... it was because he made a better-looking girl than me. I want you to have a good time. It was going to be absolute hell soon. I nodded. Okay, here, I'm gonna predict what's gonna happen. The prince is gonna see me, he's gonna be, no way, and he's gonna dress me up and beautifully, and everyone's gonna be like, holy shit, I think I'm gay. I nodded and he fell back into the place beside me. You shouldn't even have to be here. If you did get discovered. No, you're hiding for a reason. One that I was actually never told. I assumed our father had intended to when he felt like I was ready, but his illness had hid his ability to speak too soon. But I trusted him. He wouldn't make me do any of this if it wasn't true that exposing myself would put me and my loved ones in danger somehow. Nick had never questioned our father's decision to make me into his little brother, at least not in front of me. I was going to be exposed eventually, though. At the very least, when I was dead. Was it the habit that was making me keep up the charade until then? The guard had given us playful catcalls as we walked through the halls. I wouldn't have been surprised if that was because the prince had ordered them to. The masquerade itself was rich. Once we'd stepped into the room, I was afraid to do or touch anything. Every bit of decoration here looked like it was more worth than my life. My brother stood next to me for a moment, but eventually walked up towards the table with food. I scrambled to be in his shadow, just like I used to when we were kids. If not for the dresses and impressively opulent atmosphere, it would have felt nostalgic. Yeah, but there's the dresses. I couldn't really get into the party mood. Everyone around me seemed to be enjoying themselves, except for my brother anyway. He didn't used to be at this star. When we had parties at home, he was always the one running around talking to people. And it wasn't just because we were among friends and family. Whenever we went somewhere, he'd always make the effort to at least meet one new person. Of course, he'd been here long enough and had probably met every soldier, castle worker, and townspeople person. He'd even met the prince. I thought about trying to talk to him, but he really made no effort to acknowledge me since we got here. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want me to be here, and it was obvious to anyone who might have considered coming up to us. I wondered if it would be better for me just to find someone else to spend time with. I could actually spot others in the crowd that I knew, ones that had expressed some interest in meeting me at the masquerade. James was laughing with a group of the other mechanics, all which had opted to look a bit more like a streetwalker or a pirate than high-class lady in their style of dress. The archmagus and prelate were surrounded by chatting women all dressed in fine men's suits, but only the prelate seemed to be enjoying the company. And then there was the prince, flitting around the room like a fairy whose job was to touch every flower so that they could bloom for spring. I doubted very much my brother would stop me if I made my way over with any of these men. He seemed more focused on draining bottles than spending time with me at any rate. After another quick glance around the room, I wondered just who I should join up with. I want to go to the prince because then he can make me pretty, but I'm going for archmagus. It's so hard. Oh my god. This is a brilliant idea. This weirdly suits him. But, you did an effort, like, oh god, this is good. This is great. This is great. The archmagus and the prelate looked very dignified despite their dress as they stood calmly and took in the conversation with the cluster of women. Women! Well, really only the prelate was bothering to speak with them. The archmagus just stood there looking annoyed with the situation at whole. I can kind of understand. I don't think that dress is too flattering. I think blue would look better on you, to be honest. And those things on your chest look better. You look better bare-chested. That's a compliment. Alright. I'm gonna have to end that start here. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.